Hi everyone and welcome to GSM Impact Conversations. Today's episode is on climate change and we will focus on the heat stress. And we will talk about the implications of the heat stress on the garment workers. I am so pleased to be joined by one of the leading voices in this debate, Professor Jason Judd. Jason is the executive director at Cornell University's School of Industrial and Labor Relations. Today, we will discuss why it is important to create mitigation and adaptation strategies to tackle heat stress and climate change, and why this is fundamental for the social rights of the garment workers. So, welcome to the conversation and welcome to the JSM Impact Conversations. Hi everyone, welcome back to the main stage, and I'm joined by Professor Jason Judd. Jason, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's good to do this in the in the COP meeting period.
Exactly. So I'm so happy to have you with us today, Jason. And let's talk about all the things and your fantastic work. You are focusing on heat stress and the implications for the garment workers. And as a person who is mother was a garment worker, this topic is quite personal to me. So I want to go deeper. But my first question will be, in this setting in which we measure everything around efficiency and economic indicators, unfortunately, garment workers are perceived as a commodity and they are seen as resources to optimize. But your research is brilliantly showing that inaction on worker well-being and ignoring climate change and heat stress will also have detrimental consequences for operational performance and financial performance. So, shall we elaborate on this and how can we explain to everyone that listens to us that working like taking actions and being worker centric is the future and this is what we should be doing?
Yeah. Okay. Well, we started by we started looking at this was 5 years ago. We began looking at the impact of the COVID crisis, a fast onset crisis in apparel, and we thought, well, what would the industry's reaction be in a slow onset crisis? Uh, and we looked first at sea level rise, and then we looked at heat, the effects of extreme heat. Um, and then we went looking for the industry's planning. What were they doing about extreme heat? In an industry known for sweatshops, you think they'd be anxious to move. They'd be anxious to move on literal sweatshops. That they would have something in the in their programs to reduce extreme heat. And we found almost nothing. We spoke to a dozen brands. We spoke to a dozen suppliers. We spoke with dozens and dozens of workers. Um, and there was nothing to speak of, nothing in force to bring down high heat in places like in Cambodia, Bangladesh, Honduras, etc. In some of those places, there were rules on the books. Here's the maximum heat threshold for indoor manufacturing work, for example, but enforcement was nil, generally speaking. What was the industry saying about climate breakdown and its impact on workers? They were just talking about mitigation, which is enormously important. It's sort of the driver of global heating, but there was nothing in the programs or the planning by the industry on what we call adaptation, dealing with climate breakdown as it's showing up in workers' lives and in the lives of manufacturers, the production process. So we focused in a second round of research on extreme heat and intense flooding. That was 2023, 2024. And we focused on 4 countries. It was Bangladesh, Cambodia, Pakistan, and Vietnam, which together represented at that time 17, 18% of global production. And they all sit in that sort of tropical, subtropical band around the world where so much of apparel production is done. And we looked at the problem, yes, from a few angles. We were interested in how manufacturers were thinking about extreme heat. Heat was really when we ran the numbers, the economic damage was being done by extreme heat. Flooding can be catastrophic. It can force workers from their homes. It can close factories for weeks at a time. But heat is laid on generally, and most of the economic damage or loss associated with high heat anyway comes from heat, not flooding. So we developed a toy model, and we ran numbers for those four countries, estimating the economic damage that it would do to the industry. And by damage, we mean how much damage would extreme heat do to worker productivity. As the heat rises, we use the wet bulb globe temperature, this heat humidity combination. As that rises, as it ticks up from 27 to 28 to 29 to 30, uh, workers' health suffers. They begin to dehydrate. Work slows down. It can lead to fainting. It can lead to heat stroke. There are upper limits for for human performance in manufacturing as in anything else, and the fall off in workers' productivity shows up in earnings at the factory level. So whether you're concerned about the impact on workers' health or you're concerned about margins, you've got an interest in this problem. And then we ran in a very preliminary, elementary way the ROI on the return on investment for heat interventions at the factory level. And there was more than a little guesswork involved here, but in a lot of factories where there are no effective cooling systems, putting in a simple sort of water evaporative cooling system can bring the temperature down 3, 4, 5, 6, even 7 Celsius, and that has an effect. It makes work more comfortable for workers. It has health upsides, but it also improves their productivity. So the factory is earning back in terms of increased productivity what it's been losing to high heat. And the ROI on that, we think in most places we looked at a high level, is 2, 3, 4 years, depending on the factory, depending on the climate. So it's a manageable problem, which brought us back to the top. Why has the industry failed to move on this? And there are a number of reasons for that. We can talk about that if you like.
Absolutely. Yes, let's talk about it because you say something really important. Well, we talk about one industry which is quite labor intensive, and the countries you mentioned are producing the highest volumes in terms of production. So these are fundamental locations for the business, and these companies unfortunately still don't embrace the supply chain thinking. So apparently one of the biggest problems is they are looking from the organizational perspective, but actually their supply chains are their organizations. So they operate in the supply chains. So workers are not just outsiders, they are part of those organizational structures. My question is also quite linked with what you were mentioning about mitigation and adaptation. Also, from our research, we see one thing time and again. Workers have solutions, also they have suggestions, and they need practical help, and also they need certain things for which we need to listen and we need to use the act of empathy. My question then is about the concept of just transition. Jason, so we are actually talking about risk and benefit distribution in the most negative way, and we are literally just ignoring the real life realities of these workers in these climate conversations, which oftentimes happen at the top level. How can we ensure just transition, and how can we ensure decarbonization and climate action can take place in an inclusive and safe and just way?
Yeah, well, it's a big
Very big
question.
question.
Um, we we lump adaptation in with mitigation when we talk about just transition. Just transition often refers to the energy transition, which is mostly about what gets how energy is produced, how much carbon it puts out, etc. The the adaptation challenges, in our case, extreme heat, intense flooding, also belong there. At least in part because most of the political energy, most of the financing commitments are for mitigation, are for decarbonization, and not for adaptation. They usually run. This may be an old figure now, but they usually run about 8 or 9 to 1. So $8 available for spending on mitigation, and $1 available for adaptation, which includes prevention. Dealing with, for example, fitting a factory to reduce the daily the afternoon highs in a city like Dhaka, um, from 37 or 38 in the production areas, sewing, uh, washing, ironing, down to say 32 Celsius. What would that cost? Where would the money come from? All that's part of adaptation, and it's had too little attention. So little of the money and the political energy has been focused on adaptation. That's beginning to change. We've seen brands begin to introduce standards or toy with the idea of setting heat thresholds. We see at the highest level, uh, in the COP 30 meetings going on now. We see what's known as the GGA, the Global Goal on Adaptation, which attempts to set ways to measure and clearer, more specific goals for the governments, for the parties in those negotiations. That should be, that's reinforcing the signal that the brands and the governments in these producing countries, and unions, campaigners, are getting that the focus on adaptation is rising, is strengthening. So it's about time. It's awfully late. A lot of damage has been done, but it's not too late. And these industries, by making these adaptive investments, reducing temperatures in factories, looking for ways to reduce temperatures in workers' homes, can uh, can avoid some of the worst of climate breakdown and sort of bend the growth curve for these industries, which means earnings for workers, earnings for employers, new jobs, upward instead of over the long term downward. That's how we did our analysis. We imagined sort of two industries: an apparel industry that invests in adaptation and makes work and life more comfortable and safer for workers will grow at this rate. This is the curve. This is the curve of that of growth. It might be 6 or 7 or 8%, its historic rate in places like Bangladesh, Cambodia, etc. Or without those investments, it will grow. It'll increase, but at a much slower pace, and that means lower earnings for workers, fewer jobs in these economies where job creation is job one. Bangladesh is a good example of that.
Absolutely.
That's
No, Jason,
yeah.
thank you so much. This is really important. Also, responsible leadership is needed and inclusive governance structures. Yes, you have a point. Some brands are getting more serious about the concept of just transition, but as you pointed out, there's this mismatch between mitigation and adaptation. And we invite all the stakeholders to join forces to create inclusive social dialogues to understand how we can really create more preventative measures and how we can create adaptation strategies to make sure everyone will be somehow safe and protected from climate change. Last but not least, I also have this question which is quite theoretical, but in the supply chain management discipline, we work around supply chains, operations, and design and management of global supply chains. In the context of climate change and heat stress, what would you like to say to the supply chain management scholars? How should we approach this new reframing of global supply chains in the context of heat stress? What researchers do you think we should be doing to further these conversations?
Well, we found as we were designing this research that we had to take risks, that we were working outside the domains that are most familiar to us. We're industrial relations scholars, um, students of apparel production, but we were unfamiliar with climate science, for example, or how to do an analysis of headwinds or losses for brands. So we had to find we had this is not new for folks doing supply chain scholarship, but we had to work across these disciplinary lines to find people who could bring into our analysis an understanding of climate science in particular. Um, and I find when we're looking in the academic literature, we find it's often siloed. So very advanced scientific analysis of the impacts of heat on the human body. And then very sort of oral history focused analyses of the impacts for workers. And then in between those two is, well, a lot of work needs to be done. And it was for us, it was a risk to say we're going to try to answer these questions, some of which are unfamiliar to us. So maybe that's my advice.
It's a great answer, and also you are inviting all of us, and also your work is underlining the importance of interdisciplinary research because we are all complementary and we need to really join forces. But also one thing which I wanted to underline, your work is also somehow building the bridge between academic research and policy. So also I wanted to underline the importance of those conversations that you are leading to bring implications for practitioners, but also for the policymakers. And I hope we will give some inspirations to all the folks listening to us on how they can also approach research in a more creative ways to create long-lasting conversations. Jason, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you being here. And do you want to say something before we go? Any final takeaway or any questions?
Well, this refers to something we were talking about a little earlier, sort of the industry's response. Often at the producer country level, the employers and the government are joined at the hip. And one of the things that's missing in both in public and in public and private regulation of this heat issue is clear standards. So probably the one of the first most important things the industry, meaning the governments, the employers, the brands and retailers can do is pick a number in each of these countries and say here's the upper limit for heat, either just expressed in terms of temperature or in terms of wet bulb up, a heat humidity index. And then the machinery of the state and the machinery of private regulation, built at great expense over the last 30 years, but with not a lot to, arguably in the aggregate, not a lot to show for it, can go to work on this problem. And one of the reasons, I mentioned this sort of at the top, one of the reasons that this hasn't been done yet or is happening, but slowly, is because there's this tension between buyers and manufacturers. They often talk about one another in terms of partnership, but there's this real tension, which I think was exacerbated in the COVID years when orders were precipitously canceled. Uh, the buyers and retailers would like to set a standard, but suppliers are saying, we've had enough of the rulemaking, these additions to the terms of trade that don't come with any forbearance on price. So you're about to set a new standard for us. It's going to cost us money, and you're insisting on ever lower prices. So that old problem hasn't gone away. But by picking a number and saying here's what we're aiming at, we can ramp up to a regime. It's a combination of public and private regulation that tracks the levels, shows managers what they're losing to heat and what they might claw back by investing in cooling technologies. Anyway, just putting to work the analysis that we've done over the last couple of years.
Absolutely, and it's a great point to finalize the conversation. So we also invite all the researchers and all the companies that listen to us. Um, Relations are important, but also fashion supply chains are traditionally having this transactional nature. Unfortunately, the buyer and supply relations haven't changed much of the last 20, 30 years. We are still actually operating in these old structures where
Yeah,
things are quite transactional. We have to be more partnership oriented and more
yeah,
emotional and relational. That's why I hope responsible purchasing will be the main driver, and people, especially brands, will start seeing ecological and social well-being as the key driver, not as just a business outcome because of the lack of engagement with the workers. But let's hope. Hopefully, some things will change. But Jason, thank you so much for your work, and I'm so happy to have you here. And everyone, please follow Jason and get inspirations from his groundbreaking work. And let's stay in touch and let's build these conversations further. And I will see you all at the next Impact Conversations episode. And Jason, hope to see you sometime somewhere soon.
Yeah. All right. Great. Thanks again.
Cheers. Bye
So
bye.
long.